or that the publishing industry has evolved since then, untrue, but nice, because in all the books written for children and teens and published in America in 2018, do you know that only 5% have Latinx characters? Only 7% have Asian or Pacific characters. Only 10% have Black characters. Did you know that 27% of books written for children in 2018 featured characters who are animals? More than all those groups combined. Do you know what that means? It means that if you're Asian and reading in English in a country like Malaysia, where the publishing industry, while growing, is small, and where we still struggle with the concept of West is best, and where most of our English books still rely on imports from Western countries, you're almost 4 times more likely to read a book with a bunny as the main character than anyone who looks like you. And I need you to bear in mind that those numbers are talking about representation. They're not talking about good representation. They're talking about any representation at all. So a book like this, called A Suicide Bomber Sits in the Library, about a brown boy whose mission to blow up a library is thwarted by the books surrounding him, this counts as representation. I'm going to read you some excerpts from it now. He is a boy and he's bored. He's wearing a lovely new red jacket, which conceals a suicide vest which has been cleverly sewn into the jacket's lining. The boy is obedient, and so he waits. It is hard to sit still because of the excitement of the day and the honor he has been given to blow up the enemy of his people. He has been instructed to remain silent because books will master him just as they have mastered his enemies. He has been taught that books create a false life in a godless world that should not exist. Books cannot be trusted in a world where only God has the keys to paradise. This was a book slated for publication in May 2019. This was a book from the graphic novel imprint of a major American publisher, a publisher whose titles include the incredibly popular Diary of a Wimpy Kid series, a publisher that publicized the release of this book widely through the social media of its children's publishing imprint, emphasizing the two creators' kidlit credentials, particularly the Newbery Medal one of them had been awarded in the past. Now, after much backlash, the book was eventually pulled from publication. I won't tell you how to feel about that. Some people agreed with that decision and some didn't. There were people who couldn't understand why, didn't see that marketing a feel-good story about the power of reading and books and libraries, where the brown character, the Muslim-coded character, an illiterate child, is depicted as a terrorist, plays into horrific stereotypes and harms the kids who share those identities. Kids who, like an Egyptian friend of mine who grew up in the heart of West Virginia in America, get used to being called Towelhead and Osama and go back to Arab as they walk down the halls of their schools based on how they look, based on their names. I write books now. That's why I'm here talking to you. I'm not just some random person they pulled out of a hat. I'm an author of books for kids and teens. My first just came out in February. It's called The Weight of Our Sky. This is not a marketing thing. I'm just trying to tell you why I'm here. Some of you might even have read it. My next is a middle grade novel that comes out next year, and that's a middle grade anthology that I'm part of next year. It isn't easy being a person living in Malaysia and publishing in America. It isn't easy standing firm and writing stories that are about Malaysians and people entirely by Malaysian characters who speak our languages and practice our cultures, and then to be told by editors that this book just wasn't for them, that they just couldn't connect to the story. It isn't easy to have a name like mine, to look like me, to be so visibly outside of the majority. I was stunned when I got my first anonymous hate mail that told me I was simply riding a diversity wave, that if everything was equal, there was no way someone like me would be published at all. Well, that's sort of what it said. As you can see, it wasn't quite so polite. This is just one of many. That's why when I first saw my words in book form, when I got that box in the mail full of these, I sat down and I sobbed like a baby. It's true, I scared my kids. They thought I'd broken something. And I had. I was crying because I'd broken the boxes. Both the ones other people put me in based on their perceptions of me, and the one I put myself in with all 5 of my names to fit in. Because here's another thing nobody told me. Whether you make yourself less or more, it's going to have an impact on someone else. And this is why I no longer apologize, not for my name, not for my culture, not for my religion, not for writing my people into the narrative. Because if I had seen someone who looked like me, someone with a name like mine, anywhere on the shelf full of English books I read so voraciously as a kid, maybe I wouldn't have internalized the message that my stories didn't belong there. Maybe if I'd read a character that looked like me as a kid, I'd have figured out that our stories matter. Maybe if I'd seen an author that looked like me as a kid, that had a name that sounded like mine, I'd have figured out that I could do this too. That I didn't have to change myself to fit a box. That I could carve out a space that fit me, exactly me, just as I am. It took me a long time to figure that out on my own because I didn't get to see those things. But if I stop making myself less, if I allow myself to expand, take up space, be myself loudly and unapologetically, then maybe I can be a catalyst for someone else. And you can too. Because among all the many things that Suicide Bomber book got so terribly wrong, the one thing that it got right is that, to a certain extent, books do have their own power. The power to soothe us, to entertain us, to enlighten us, to inspire us, to shape our ideas of what the world is and what it could be, or what it should be. Now, you may not be the ones writing the books, you may not be the ones with the hard to pronounce names, but you are in the unique position of being able to put books directly into the hands of a young audience. You can be the difference between a child seeing a kid that looks like them as a tragic figure to be used as inspiration, or the guy who gets the girl, a suicide bomber, or the hero of their own story, surrounded by communities who look like their own. Now, at talks like this, I like to reference the words of Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, who says, "Books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange." 2 minutes, I got it. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through in imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experiences and reflects it back to us, and in that reflection we see our own lives and experiences as part of a larger human experience. Reading then becomes an act of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. Now, if you remember nothing else from this talk, because I've talked for a very long time, and I'm probably not as interesting as I think I am, I'd like you to at least do this. Go back and look over your library collections at your schools and ask yourself, how many of these are windows? How many are mirrors? How many of my students will see names like theirs on the covers, faces like theirs within the pages? Who gets to tell what story and who is missing from the narrative? And how can I do better for the kids I serve? Because the crux of it is that the kids deserve better. They deserve to see themselves as the heroes of the story. Every child does. If I could have told little Hanna what was to come, she wouldn't have believed it. So, once more, with feeling, my name is Hanna Alkaf. Say it right. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Very much appreciated. And a very powerful message that I'm so glad that we invited you to join us to open this librarians knowledge sharing